Hi guys, welcome back to Read Instead. I'm Jake, glad to have you here today. I'm giving you my immediate reaction to the novel Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. Stick around. Okay, so great to be with you guys again. This is my immediate reaction playlist that I got going on. You guys know as soon as I finish a novel, right away, I make a video about it and give you my immediate reaction to it. And I just finished this about, no lie, 15 minutes ago. I want to be sort of careful with the words that I use here. Sometimes, I maybe tend to, when I really enjoy a novel, sometimes I maybe tend to over-exaggerate a little bit. Let me just say this. I know this may sound a little weird, but again, just being honest with you guys, I feel blessed to have read this novel. I really connected with this book. And I can assure you, when I make my top 10 reads of 2024 at the end of this year, spoiler alert, this book will certainly be on it. I don't know if it's the best novel that I've ever read, but I feel confident saying this. It's the most beautiful book that I think I've ever read. I really connected with the writing style of Charles Frazier. Now, let's just get into it a little bit. This book is sort of advertised as a romance. In fact, you guys know that I like to read paperbacks, and I picked up the paperback here for just a couple dollars at my local used book store. And at the bottom of it, it says, "Astonishing, a genuinely romantic saga." Okay, so let me just break it down for you. This is what this book is about. This book is about, mainly it's about two people. And this takes place in the Confederacy, the southern United States, at the end of the Civil War. And right at the beginning of the book, you meet these two characters. And one is a young woman who ends up, she's left alone. It was just her and her father living somewhat prosperously on a farm, and he unfortunately passes away, and she's sort of in a new stage of life where, she's left alone, and she was sort of kept a child in some ways, and very close by her father. And she, loved him. It was the only person in her life that really she knew or she connected with. It was like a very tight bond and a tight relationship. And he, unfortunately, passes away, and she's left sort of wondering at, a woman in her mid-20s with nobody else, no real family to speak of, where she's at. What do I do now? Where am I at in life? The other character that we get introduced to is a Confederate soldier who is in the hospital, the military infirmary, and he has an injury. And he decides one morning to just get up, and he jumps out the window. He literally jumps out the window, and he becomes a deserter. As the story progresses, you realize that these two people had sort of not a deep, real love, romantic connection before the war, but they had a connection. There was some sort of simple, quick connection that they had with one another, and it was abruptly disrupted by the war, and he has to go off and fight. You have like these two stories sort of simultaneously going on. This woman trying to figure out her new lot in life. How is she going to make it? How is she going to live on her own? No husband, no children. She has this land, and she's got to figure out what to do with it. And this man, who, by all intents and purposes, has PTSD. This man is wrecked from the war. And you get such a sense of 1865 at the end of the Civil War, and I wouldn't call myself a Civil War buff, but I've always been very interested. I remember when I saw, when I was 13, I saw Ken Burns's Civil War documentary, and I think that my personal opinion is that every American citizen should watch that documentary. The Civil War tells us so much about ourselves. I don't want to digress too much. But anyway, you get such a sense of how the South in 1865, when the war was all but lost, was just decimated. It really was decimated. I remember hearing a statistic at some point that basically 100% all citizens of the Confederacy or the Southern United States, it never really, it didn't turn, it was only the Confederacy for a few years. But every single citizen had an immediate family member that died in the Civil War, whether it be a brother or a father. Every single person. That's just, it's tragic, it's insane. The carnage and the bloodshed that happened during that war is appalling. Something should have stopped it. But again, I don't want to get into that. It's about this video is about Cold Mountain. It's about these two people. The man's name is Inman, and again, he decides to desert, and he's basically just, like any deserter, I'm not, they make a decision that I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to lose my life, especially fighting for a cause that I don't believe in. Whatever. There's really not much of that in the novel. His mindset of why he deserted and stuff like that. There's not much in that. This novel is about, I would say, more than a romance. It is a romance, but to me, it's more of a story about survival, and it's two people trying to survive. Something else that Inman has to deal with in regards to his survival and his trek back to Cold Mountain is when you were a deserter from the army, from the Confederacy, you were breaking the law. And they had these posses that basically went around, and if they found any deserters, they just murdered them. And this was something that Inman had to constantly be on watch for and look out. And I'll just give you a quick example of when talking about survival and what he had to deal with. There's a scene in this book where he gets sort of taken into a home and fed and stuff, and that was often the case with people just wandering the woods and trying to survive. If they happen upon a house and somebody, if you're starving, it's like you ask for food, And so anyway, him and this guy that he ends up traveling with for just a short time, they get brought into this home, and long story short, they get tricked into being delivered over to one of these posses, and he basically gets put on chain and shackle, and he's like with all these other deserters, seven or eight other deserters, and they're getting walked through the woods. They come to a spot in the woods where there's graves already dug, and they line all these men up, and they all get shot and thrown into the grave. Well, Inman's gunshot wound was not fatal. A lot of times back then, at that particular time, the ammunition was so precious and scarce that if they wanted to kill two people, they would put two people back to back, and they would shoot one bullet through a guy, hoping that it would go through the other one. Well, it was that sort of thing, and but Inman survived, and he played dead until he was buried in a shallow grave, and then hours later, after the guys had taken off, he gets up and just finds a way to plug his wound and continue on his track. So that's just one example of many that things that he had to endure on his way back to Cold Mountain. And in the back of their minds, it sort of slowly gets more and more revealed as the story goes on that this very brief but powerful encounter and connection that they made with each other before the war started and they were separated had a really profound impact on them, and they both wanted to be in, connect again, and they wanted to be in each other's lives. And I think all because of that, you know, I'm not a huge romance reader, but I think because it was so, it's hard to find the words to, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like they had this huge connection. It was almost very cordial. It was like in the most polite way that two people could meet and come together and basically, you know, reconnect and start some sort of courtship. It's like you have this huge journey that he takes, and that really takes up the entire novel. And he is trying to survive, and at the same time, he wants to sort of show up at this girl's doorstep, you know, clean shaven and with his hair combed, and you know, say some sort of polite and chivalrous line to her to sort of start that, rekindle that you know, connection that they once had. And that aspect of it, because I you know, again, like I said, I'm not a huge romance reader, but I just feel like that's so different from like these two, you know, these cosmic forces like sort of bringing people together, and you know, them being, you know, just so, you know, like the flesh connection between the two of them was so minimal, and I think that in itself made it more romantic. For me, it did. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. You know, I could go on and on about like I said, those two characters surviving. You know, how the woman, her name's Ada, Ada, how she sort of gets on her feet and starts to manage her property and survive, and how Inman, the man trying to get back to Cold Mountain, how he survives. There's plenty of plot that takes place, but more than the thing that moved me the most in this novel is Charles Frazier's writing. I've never read writing like this before in my life. I honestly never have, and it's not even the like the high prose and, you know, language. It's just the way in which he wrote. I bookmarked a couple things that I would like to read to you guys, and if I could just maybe expound on it a little bit, maybe you'll understand sort of what I'm talking about. Okay, so as you guys remember, just a few minutes ago, I talked about how Ada and Inman, before he got called into the war, they had that brief connection. Well, one of the things that they did, they just went on a walk, you know, by the creek one day, and on that walk they start to talk, and Inman basically tells her this story of Cold Mountain, and basically he recounts a story that he heard from a Native American woman that he knew in his youth. And it was like it was a folkloric story, and I won't get into that particular story, but he goes on and he tells this beautiful sort of Indian folkloric story. So when that finishes the story, her first response is like, well, obviously that was folklore, and then she instantly regretted it when she said it, because she knew that the story, you know, she realized that the story meant a lot to him. So anyway, then they begin to depart from one another, and as he's walking away, he gets about 20 paces away, and he turns around, and he notices that she had already started to walk away herself. And then she turns around and notices that he turned around, okay? And basically he says, she says, well, is everything okay? And he says, well, I'm paraphrasing here. I couldn't begin to speak how Charles Frazier writes, but I'm just paraphrasing. He says, it would make a man feel nice that a woman would keep her eyes on him as he walks away. And he said, you know, but you don't want to, and I see it's okay. And she was like, well, I'm sorry, I didn't think that was very important. He said, well, you know, some men like that kind of stuff. So then they depart. And the next day or two, they see each other, and Inman's getting he just came to say his farewell. Actually, she kind of went out and sought him, but he was like in the neighborhood basically making his farewells because he was about to go join the front lines. And Ada comes out and says this to him. She said, "I wanted to tell you, I thought things concluded badly yesterday. Not at all as I had wished them to. Not in a satisfying way." Inman's mouth tightened like a cord had been pulled in him. He said, "I don't believe you. I take your meaning. I was headed upriver to say my goodbyes to Esco and Sally. When I came to the road up Black Cove, I thought I might as well say one to you too. And I did. It was, as best as I could tell, satisfactory." Ada lacked experience in having her apologies rejected, and her first thought was to turn and walk down the steps and put Inman forever behind her. But what she said was, we might never speak again. And I don't plan to leave that comment standing in place of the truth. You're not owning up to it. But you came with expectations, and they were not realized, largely because I behaved contrary to my heart. I'm sorry for that, and I would do it differently if given a chance to go back and revise. You know, for me, just there's something about the simplicity and the straightforwardness of the language and the dialogue between the people in this story that just really connected with me. I feel like because there was of that society back then, because it was very sort of conservative and old-fashioned, and everything was sort of pulled back and tight, and you had to be reserved and stuff. And just for a girl to say, you know, I know that you came to me yesterday with expectations and they were not realized, and I just want to let you know that I'm sorry, and that's not my heart. And she's like trying to be honest with him, and she's saying if I could go back and do it again, I would. It's just beautiful. I could go on and on about the writing. It's honestly the most beautiful writing that I've ever read. That's how I feel right now. Again, 20 minutes after finishing it. This, without a doubt, is a 5-star read for me. Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. I would love for you guys to pick it up and give it a shot. If you've ever read it, without spoiling anything, talk about it in the comments. Great reading experience. I've been the last 2 books from Swan Song to this. I've had a couple great novels now just in the past few weeks, so very happy about that. Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. See you guys next time.